Have you ever looked at something headed for the trash and wondered, what if it could bloom again? Here at Nest Nature, we believe every discarded item holds a secret second life. In today's video, we'll explore inspiring DIY trash garden ideas that can transform your tiny yard, patio, or backyard into something unforgettable. You'll find timestamps below, so you can jump to the part you need. And if questions come to mind, drop them in the comments. I'll be right there with you. If you enjoy these ideas, take them, shape them, and bring them to life with whatever you already have at home. Maybe to you, I'm just another face on a screen. But behind this content is a true story, and a real family. This isn't just a video, it's a piece of my heart. Every like, every comment, every subscribe matters more than you can imagine. When you hit subscribe, you're not just helping a channel grow. You're helping keep a dream alive. You're giving a small family hope, one click at a time. Thank you for being here, and thank you for seeing me. In a quiet corner of the garden, where the fence once stood bare and weathered, a transformation took place that charmed every passerby. Old, forgotten cups, some chipped, some stained from years of tea, were given a new life. Each was carefully painted in pastel shades of soft pink, cream, and dusty blue, turning them into gentle jewels that glowed against the rustic wooden fence. When the cups were placed in a row, something magical happened. They no longer looked like discarded tableware. Instead, they became little guardians of color, each holding a story, each brimming with delicate blossoms. Chrysanthemums filled the larger cups with layers of golden petals, asters leaned out shyly with their purple faces, and marigolds stood proudly, their bold orange and yellow flames dancing in the autumn air. As the sun rose, light spilled across the garden, catching the painted surfaces of the cups and making them shimmer. The once plain fence now whispered of creativity, thrift, and the joy of upcycling. It was a reminder that beauty often hides in the overlooked corners of life, waiting for a brush of paint, a thoughtful hand, and the courage to see potential where others see trash. Visitors walking by could not help but pause. They leaned closer to admire the tiny details, the hand-drawn butterflies on one cup, the faded roses painted on another, the way small Japanese anemones swayed gently from a cup painted sky blue. Children laughed and pointed, while adults smiled, remembering cups from their grandmother's kitchens, cups that once carried warmth and comfort. By evening, when the garden was wrapped in golden twilight, the cups seemed to glow softly, holding not just flowers but a sense of nostalgia and playfulness. The rustic fence was no longer just a boundary. It was a storybook border, alive with blooms and colors. In that tiny yard, what was once junk had become a symbol of possibility. With each cup reborn, the garden spoke of a truth timeless and simple. When love and imagination meet, even the smallest, most ordinary things can turn into extraordinary beauty. heart of a small garden, a row of forgotten piggy banks found a second chance to shine. Once guardians of coins and childhood secrets, they had long been abandoned, dusty, cracked, and tossed aside. Yet with a splash of paint and a gardener's vision, they were reborn as planters, carrying not coins but blossoms. Each piggy, once dull and lifeless, now wore cheerful coats of color, soft pinks that echoed morning skies, mint greens that whispered of spring, and bright yellows that glowed like sunshine. Their rounded shapes brought a playful spirit into the garden, and their little snouts peeked out proudly from beneath tufts of flowers. Marigolds burst forth in golden blooms, their fiery hues contrasting with the piggies' pastel shells. Asters leaned delicately, their purple petals brushing against the painted surfaces. Chrysanthemums filled the larger piggy banks, heavy with petals like layers of silk, while sedum autumn joy spread gently around the edges, catching the evening light in warm pink tones. Children visiting the garden squealed in delight at the sight of these whimsical planters. "Piggy pots!" they cried, reaching out to touch the rounded figures that seemed alive with character. Adults, too, could not resist smiling. The playful arrangement reminded them of childhood savings jars, of lessons learned about patience and hope, now transformed into a lesson about renewal. Placed along the garden border, the piggy bank planters created a ribbon of color that led the eye across the space. What was once a tiny, unremarkable corner had become a stage where creativity danced with nature. The piggies seemed to celebrate their new role, no longer hoarding coins but nurturing blossoms that fed bees, butterflies, and hearts alike. As the seasons changed, the plants shifted within the piggy banks. In autumn, marigolds burned brighter against the fading light. In early spring, Japanese anemones swayed gently with the breeze. The piggy banks, though once destined for the trash, now stood proudly as timeless guardians of life and growth. It was a story whispered by the garden itself, that joy can be found in the unexpected, that even the most ordinary or playful things, when touched by imagination, can bloom into lasting beauty. As the sun began to sink, the backyard pergola transformed into a haven of gentle light and quiet wonder. From the wooden beams above, recycled bottles swayed in the evening breeze, their surfaces painted in shades of lavender, aqua, and soft cream. Once empty vessels discarded as trash, they now glowed warmly, their bodies filled with tiny sparks of light that turned the garden into a dreamscape. The pergola, once ordinary, became a gathering place where twilight lingered a little longer. Chrysanthemums stood proudly at its base, their golden crowns catching the glow from above. Asters stretched upward, their violet petals bathed in soft radiance, while marigolds burned like small suns beneath the lanterns. Sedum autumn joy, blushing pink in the cool air, framed the scene with gentle elegance. Each bottle told a story. Some bore the marks of old labels faintly hidden beneath layers of paint, others shimmered with hand-drawn patterns of stars and butterflies. Together, they became a constellation of color and creativity, turning what was once overlooked trash into treasured pieces of art. Families gathered beneath the pergola in the soft glow. Children pointed upward, marveling at how bottles, so simple, so common, could shine like captured fireflies. Adults found themselves lingering, cups of tea in hand, speaking in hushed tones as though the light had wrapped them in a spell. In the quiet hours, when the garden fell still, the bottles continued to glow softly. Their light was not harsh nor grand but tender, inviting reflection. It was a reminder that beauty thrives not in extravagance but in the thoughtful transformation of the simple and the humble. The glowing bottles whispered of possibility, that even the most ordinary objects can be given new purpose, that trash can be turned into treasures that light the soul. And as the night deepened, the pergola became a beacon, not just for those who walked beneath it, but for the spirit of creativity itself, forever illuminating the garden with warmth, color, and hope. In a tiny yard where space seemed scarce, a fresh tide of creativity rolled in. Old cups, chipped and forgotten, were reborn as vessels of the sea. Painted in soothing tones of turquoise, sandy beige, and foamy green, they shimmered like fragments of ocean dreams placed gently upon the earth. Each cup carried more than soil. It carried the memory of waves and shorelines. A seashell pattern danced across one handle, a painted ripple curved across another, while a tiny starfish motif adorned the rim of a third. Within them, succulents nestled tightly, their plump leaves mirroring corals hidden beneath the tide. Chrysanthemums bloomed boldly, golden against the sea-inspired backdrop, while asters added violet waves that swayed like ocean currents. Pebbles and shells were scattered carefully along the edges, anchoring the seaside illusion. Sedum autumn joy spilled gracefully from one cup, its rosy blooms like sunset clouds over a calm horizon. Nearby, Japanese anemones lifted their delicate white petals, soft as seafoam on a morning shore. Though the yard was small, the scene breathed expansiveness. Passers-by often paused, surprised to find the whisper of a seascape nestled in such a modest space. Children would crouch low, touching the painted cups and marveling at the shells. Adults lingered, recalling summers by the sea, where laughter mingled with salt air and sunlight sparkled on waves. As daylight faded, the tiny yard did not lose its charm. Instead, the painted cups seemed to glow softly in the twilight, their pastel colors enriched by the deepening hues of dusk. The garden felt alive with a quiet rhythm, as though the tide itself had reached this little patch of earth, bringing with it serenity and renewal. Here, trash had transformed into treasure, not through grandeur but through thoughtful simplicity. A chipped cup became a coral reef, a faded mug became a tide pool, and together they told a story of the sea, its beauty, its resilience, its timeless call. And so, in this tiny yard, the ocean lived again, not in vast waters but in small painted cups that carried within them the eternal spirit of the waves. In the quiet glow of evening, the backyard came alive with warmth. Old bottles, once discarded as nothing more than junk, now hung proudly from beams and branches, transformed into lanterns that spoke of farmhouse charm. Painted in soft rustic tones, sage green, cream, and weathered brown, they glowed with a light that felt both timeless and tender. Each lantern carried its own story. Some bore delicate hand-painted patterns of vines and wildflowers, others were left with a simple matte finish, their humble surfaces catching the candlelight within. When lit, they cast a gentle radiance across the garden, turning every leaf and flower into a moment of quiet poetry. Beneath the lanterns, chrysanthemums opened wide, golden petals shining like tiny suns. Asters reached toward the warm glow, their violet faces softened by shadows. Marigolds burned with orange and gold, bold yet softened by the rustic light. Sedum autumn joy added touches of rosy calm, while Japanese anemones danced delicately in the cool night air. Neighbors passing by would pause, drawn to the scene. The farmhouse lantern seemed to whisper of simpler times, of evenings spent on porches, of quiet laughter and soft conversations, of stories told by firelight. There was no extravagance here, only the beauty of renewal, of taking what was cast aside and breathing life into it again. The small patio corner became a sanctuary. Families gathered beneath the lanterns, their faces illuminated with warmth, their hearts eased by the gentle glow. Children watched the shadows flicker on the fence, imagining tales of fairies and fireflies, while adults found themselves lost in memories of old farmhouse kitchens and wooden barns. Even when the wind picked up, the bottles swayed but never faltered. Their light held steady, a symbol of resilience and transformation. What was once junk had become a source of comfort, guiding the night with quiet grace. And so, in the stillness of the backyard, the farmhouse lantern bottles reminded all who saw them, beauty lies not in perfection, but in the stories we create when we choose to see possibility in the discarded, and when we dare to let light shine through the cracks of what was once forgotten. Of the garden, where gravel met moss, a quiet order revealed itself. Aqua bottles, once tossed aside as meaningless waste, stood reborn in calm formation. Painted in muted shades of stone gray, moss green, and ivory, they aligned with a precision that mirrored the stillness of a Japanese garden. Their shapes were simple, their placement deliberate. Each bottle echoed the spirit of balance, no longer screaming of plastic waste but whispering of harmony and restraint. Some bore soft brushstrokes of bamboo, others carried painted waves that curved like rivers on their surface. Together, they formed a border not just of edges but of intention. The garden around them breathed with quiet beauty. Chrysanthemums stood like guardians, their golden blooms steady and strong. Asters, with their soft violet petals, leaned gently toward the line of bottles as though recognizing a shared grace. Japanese anemones lifted pale petals in the breeze, as if bowing in respect. Sedum autumn joy added subtle touches of pink, softening the precision with tender warmth. Visitors to the yard often stopped at this corner, drawn not by grandeur but by simplicity. They would lower their voices instinctively, as though entering a sacred place. The rows of bottles, so modest in form, seemed to radiate calm, reminding all who gazed that peace is found not in excess but in mindful order. By evening, the aqua rows reflected the fading light, their painted surfaces catching glimmers of the setting sun. The garden felt timeless, carrying both the memory of what the bottles once were and the serenity of what they had become. Children, curious and bright-eyed, would trace the bottles with their fingers, surprised that something so ordinary could look so elegant. Adults found themselves pausing, breathing slower, remembering gardens they had once seen in distant temples or quiet parks. The Japanese garden aqua rose spoke softly but with strength. Beauty does not always roar. Sometimes, it sits quietly in a line of recycled bottles, painted with patience, placed with care, offering peace to those who choose to look closely. In the backyard, where the fence once stood plain and weathered, a river of color was born. Old bottles, clear, green, and brown, were gathered, painted, and arranged until they shone in the hues of the rainbow. From deep red at one end to violet at the other, they turned the wooden fence into a canvas of joy, alive with light and life. As the sun rose, the bottles caught its rays, scattering bright reflections across the garden. Chrysanthemums glowed golden beneath the red and orange bottles, while asters leaned into the violet light as if drawn by its cool serenity. Marigolds burned like tiny suns beneath the yellows, and sedum autumn joy softened the blues with its dusky pinks. Japanese anemones, with their white petals, seemed to float in contrast, delicate yet steady against the cascade of color. The fence became more than a boundary, it became a celebration. Children danced along its length, pointing and laughing at their favorite shades. Adults paused with smiles, their hearts lifted by the unexpected brightness that turned a simple backyard into a story of renewal. What had once been trash was now a rainbow that could not fade. In the evenings, as the light grew soft, the bottles seemed to hum with warmth. The rainbow still lingered, muted but magical, casting shadows that stretched across the garden. Families gathered on benches nearby, drawn to the gentle glow, finding comfort in the playful energy that filled the air. Each bottle carried its own past, a vessel once filled with water, soda, or tea. Now, together, they spoke not of emptiness but of promise. Their new colors reminded everyone who saw them that beauty is not bought but created, piece by piece, with imagination and care. The backyard bottle rainbow fence became a landmark of joy in the neighborhood. Visitors came not to see flowers or fences but to feel what the rainbow stirred in them, a reminder that life's beauty often lies not in perfection but in transformation. Here, behind a simple home, trash had become a rainbow, and a fence had become a gateway into wonder. The gazebo stood quietly at the heart of the backyard, a simple wooden frame embraced by climbing vines and blossoms. Yet it was the wind that gave it voice. From its beams hung old cups, once forgotten and mismatched, now painted and reborn as delicate chimes that sang with every passing breeze. Each cup carried its own character. One was painted in soft sky blue, its surface brushed with tiny daisies. Another shimmered in blush pink, adorned with hand-painted butterflies. A third, creamy white with golden accents, caught the sunlight as it swayed, ringing out a gentle note. Together they danced on twine, their sounds light and playful, never loud, like whispers of joy scattered through the garden. Beneath the gazebo, chrysanthemums stood proudly in clusters of gold, their heads nodding with the rhythm of the chimes. Marigolds flamed in orange and yellow, echoing the brightness of the painted cups. Asters and Japanese anemones filled the air with color, while sedum autumn joy blushed faintly at the edges, softening the scene with tender hues. Visitors often paused beneath the chimes, drawn by both sight and sound. Children giggled, running their fingers along the swinging cups, while adults closed their eyes for a moment, letting the soft clinking carry them to memories of tea shared on porches and gardens filled with laughter. As twilight descended, the painted cups caught the fading sun, glowing with warmth as their chimes grew softer. The gazebo became not just a shelter but a sanctuary, a place where sound and color blended into harmony. Even the night air seemed to hum with calm, carrying the promise that beauty can be found in the most unexpected forms. What was once junk, cups chipped, stained, and discarded, was now a symphony of color and sound. The gazebo, once silent, now sang. And in its song was a story of transformation, that with a touch of creativity, even the most ordinary objects could create extraordinary moments of peace. The garden path, once plain and quiet, came alive with a playful spirit. Old cups, rescued from cupboards and thrift shops, were painted in a chorus of colors: soft pastels, sunny yellows, gentle blues, and rosy pinks. Lined along the edges of the path, they transformed into tiny flower guardians, guiding each step with bursts of bloom. Each cup was different, mismatched yet harmonized by their cheerful tones. Some bore whimsical dots, others delicate stripes, and a few carried hand-painted blossoms that echoed the real flowers within. Inside them, marigolds flared in fiery orange, asters leaned gracefully with violet faces, and chrysanthemums unfurled their golden crowns. Japanese anemones swayed gently, while sedum autumn joy spilled over in dusky pink, softening the trail with tender hues. As the cups formed a winding border, the garden seemed to smile. The trail no longer felt like mere stone and soil but like a journey through joy itself. Children skipped along the path, pointing at their favorite cups, the blue one with daisies, or the pink one with butterflies. Adults walked slower, savoring the surprise of color and the way the cups carried a sense of nostalgia, as though each had once belonged to a different home, a different story. By morning, dew clung to the painted rims, sparkling like tiny jewels in the early light. By afternoon, sunlight poured over the cups, making their colors glow brighter than ever. And by evening, the trail still whispered with charm, the flowers catching the golden hues of twilight. The cups, once forgotten and destined for trash, had found a new purpose: to create a trail that reminded everyone who walked it of playfulness, creativity, and renewal. The mismatched became beautiful, the ordinary became extraordinary. Now the garden was not just a place to walk but a place to wander, to be surprised, and to feel delight in the smallest details. The cutest cup flower trails proved a truth the garden had always known: that beauty does not demand perfection. It blossoms in the little mismatched things that carry stories and laughter along the way. Along the edge of the garden, where soil met path, a quiet rhythm was born. Bamboo, strong and natural, stood side by side with painted bottles, their shapes and textures weaving together into something both rustic and refreshing. The simplicity of the bamboo met the color of the bottles, creating an edging that was as practical as it was poetic. The bamboo poles rose straight and steady, their warm tones grounding the border in nature's embrace. Between them, recycled bottles glowed with soft colors, sage greens echoing leaves, sandy beiges recalling earth, terracotta shades reflecting the sunset. Once discarded, these bottles now found harmony beside the bamboo, their transformation a story told in each line and curve. Around this border, the garden bloomed with gratitude. Chrysanthemums lifted their golden crowns proudly, while asters leaned gently with violet grace. Marigolds burned in fiery tones, their energy contrasting with the quiet strength of bamboo. Japanese anemones swayed with their delicate white blooms, and sedum autumn joy filled the spaces with soft, dusky pink. Visitors often paused, tracing the edges with their eyes. Some admired the craftsmanship, how bamboo and bottle alternated with gentle precision. Others smiled at the thought of trash reborn into art. The border became not just a frame for flowers, but a bridge between the wildness of nature and the creativity of human hands. As the seasons shifted, the border remained steadfast. In spring, it guided tender shoots. In summer, it framed bursts of color. In autumn, it echoed the earth's warm palette. In winter, it stood quietly, reminding all who saw it of resilience and renewal. The bamboo and bottle mix borders told a story of balance, between old and new, between earth and color, between strength and playfulness. It whispered of possibility, that beauty often comes when two different worlds meet in harmony. And so, in this backyard corner, bamboo and bottle stood together, proving that even the simplest of materials, when joined thoughtfully, could become something timeless, something that made the garden not only grow but sing. In the quiet corners of the garden, where shadows once lingered and weeds crept slowly, bursts of sunshine suddenly bloomed. Old cups, once forgotten in cupboards, chipped and stained, were gathered and given new life. Painted in warm shades of golden yellow, ivory, and rustic orange, they became vessels for marigolds, their fiery blooms lighting up the garden like tiny lanterns. Each corner told its own story. A simple cup, painted with sunflowers, spilled over with blossoms that glowed against the green. Another, creamy white with delicate hand-drawn leaves, cradled marigolds so bright they seemed to capture the very essence of daylight. Together, these cups transformed neglected spaces into cheerful sanctuaries, where light and life flourished. The marigolds stood boldly, their petals radiant with shades of amber and flame. Around them, asters softened the edges with their violet hues, chrysanthemums spread their golden layers like crowns, and sedum autumn joy added whispers of blush pink. Japanese anemones swayed nearby, their gentle white blossoms calming the fiery brilliance of the marigolds. Passers-by were often surprised by the sight. What had once been a dull corner now commanded attention, its colors too bright to ignore. Children paused to point at the glowing flowers, while adults lingered, remembering cups from old kitchens now reborn as tiny gardens. These marigold-filled vessels carried both memory and renewal, warmth and creativity. As the sun shifted throughout the day, the cups seemed to catch its light, reflecting it back through their blossoms. By morning, dew sparkled on their painted rims. By afternoon, the blooms blazed like torches. By evening, the corners glowed softly in the golden twilight, inviting all who passed to stop, smile, and feel a spark of joy. The marigold cup corners were proof that beauty does not need grandeur. It only needs care, color, and imagination. What was once trash became treasure. What was once hidden became a highlight. And in the language of marigolds, flowers of warmth and courage, these corners spoke a message clear as sunlight. Even the smallest, most overlooked spaces can shine like the brightest of stars. At the edge of the garden, where a simple wooden fence once stood bare, a new life began to flutter. Old bottles, once dull and discarded, were carefully collected, cleaned, and given a fresh coat of pastel paint. On each one, butterflies took form, hand-painted wings of blue, yellow, and violet, frozen in flight as though resting for a moment before drifting back into the sky. The fence was no longer just a boundary. It had become a storybook canvas where butterflies danced eternally among the blooms. Chrysanthemums stood at its base like golden guardians, their many petals glowing in the sunlight. Asters leaned toward the fence, their purple stars echoing the painted wings above. Marigolds burst in fiery tones, while sedum autumn joy softened the edges with dusky pink. Japanese anemones swayed like pale moths, blending delicacy with strength. When the breeze blew, the bottles caught the light, their painted butterflies glowing as if alive. Children stopped to watch, eyes wide, pointing at their favorite wings. "Look, a blue one," they'd exclaim, tugging their parents' hands. Adults smiled quietly, drawn into memories of summer days chasing butterflies across meadows, their laughter rising with the wind. By twilight, the painted butterflies seemed to glow against the fading light, their colors enriched by the soft fire of the setting sun. The fence, once unnoticed, had become a highlight of the garden, an emblem of creativity and transformation. It was a gentle reminder that beauty can be born from the simplest things. A bottle once tossed aside could become a butterfly's resting place. A fence once plain could become a flight path for imagination. The cottage bottle butterfly fence whispered a truth to all who passed, that even in the quiet edges of a backyard, magic can live, if only we dare to paint it into being. In the playful spirit of the garden, the piggies returned, no longer keepers of coins but guardians of blossoms. Their rounded forms, once simple toys and savings jars, were painted anew in the colors of the sea. Turquoise shimmered like ocean waves, coral orange glowed like sunset upon the water, and sandy beige carried the warmth of a quiet shore. Placed carefully along the garden border, the piggies seemed to smile as they cradled their blooms. Marigolds burst proudly from one, their golden petals glowing like little suns. Asters stretched out in violet hues, soft as twilight on the horizon. Sedum autumn joy spilled gracefully from another piggy, its rosy tones reminiscent of seashells kissed by the tide. Japanese anemones, with their pale blossoms, floated gently like seafoam caught in the breeze. Around them, seashells and pebbles were scattered, weaving the story of the coast into the soil of a tiny backyard. It was as if the ocean itself had visited this modest garden, leaving behind fragments of its spirit, playful, colorful, and ever-changing. Children delighted in the sight of the piggy pots, their laughter mingling with the chimes of the wind. "Look, the ocean pigs," they cried, pointing at the painted shells and wave patterns. Adults lingered longer, amused yet touched, remembering the piggy banks of their childhood now reborn as joyful planters. As the day moved into evening, the seascape piggy garden glowed softly. The painted colors deepened under the golden light, and the flowers within them seemed to hum with life. The piggies, though once discarded, stood proudly, a row of whimsical keepers of the sea, carrying blossoms instead of coins, beauty instead of dust. They spoke of transformation, that even the most ordinary, playful objects could carry the grandeur of the ocean if touched by imagination. Here, in a backyard corner far from the waves, the sea lived again, captured not in water but in color, shape, and bloom. The seascape piggy garden was more than decor. It was a playful memory, a seaside dream reborn in flowers, reminding all who pass that the ocean can be found anywhere, even in the gentle smile of a painted piggy. forgotten corner of the garden, towers began to rise, not of stone, not of wood, but of bottles once destined for the trash. Gathered patiently, cleaned, and painted in pastel hues of mint, lavender, and soft yellow, they were stacked carefully, each one balanced upon another until they formed whimsical columns of color. From their tops and sides, chrysanthemums poured forth in glorious bloom. Golden petals shone like captured sunlight, ivory blossoms glowed with quiet grace, and deep red varieties burned like small flames against the painted glass. The towers seemed alive, as if they had always been meant to hold such abundance. At their feet, asters stretched in violet tones, harmonizing with the gentle lavender paint above. Marigolds flared in fiery contrast, their orange blossoms echoing the playfulness of the towers. Sedum autumn joy spilled gently down the sides, softening the structure with its dusky pink clusters, while Japanese anemones swayed delicately nearby, framing the towers with elegance. Neighbors often stopped to admire the spectacle. Children craned their necks upward, astonished that bottles could grow into towers so magical. Adults marveled at the creativity, shaking their heads in quiet delight, reminded that even what is thrown away can be made to stand tall again. By day, the towers sparkled in the sun, their painted surfaces glowing through layers of bloom. By twilight, they cast long shadows across the garden, the flowers catching the last warm rays as if bowing to the night. The transformation was so complete that one could hardly believe these towers were once nothing but junk. The chrysanthemum bottle towers told a story of resilience. Each bottle, fragile alone, found strength when joined with others. Each flower, though beautiful on its own, became breathtaking when woven into the design. Together, they formed something greater, a monument not to waste, but to imagination. And so, the towers stood proudly in the garden, not as monuments of grandeur but as testaments of creativity. They whispered to all who saw them, beauty does not always need marble or steel. Sometimes, it needs only bottles, paint, flowers, and the courage to believe that even the discarded can rise again, taller and more radiant than before. At first glance, it looked like a waterfall flowing through the garden. But instead of water, it was color, cups of every shape and size, painted in cheerful tones of pastel blue, rosy pink, golden yellow, and gentle green. Stacked at angles, one upon another, they formed a cascade, a river of blooms pouring endlessly into the heart of the landscape. From the top cup, chrysanthemums spilled outward like golden sunbursts, their layers of petals tumbling toward the next vessel. Below them, asters caught the flow, their violet stars leaning gracefully along the cascade. Marigolds blazed in fiery orange, bursting from tilted cups as though the sun itself was trickling downward. Sedum autumn joy softened the descent, trailing in dusky pink waves that blurred the lines between cup and soil. Japanese anemones completed the cascade with their delicate white blossoms, swaying gently at the edges like foam on the shore. The structure was playful yet balanced, a sculpture made from the ordinary. Each cup, once chipped and overlooked, found a new place in the cascade, its imperfections hidden beneath layers of paint and flowers. Together they told a story not of waste but of renewal, of transformation that turned the mundane into the marvelous. Children were enchanted, standing before the cascade with wide eyes, their imaginations filled with tales of magical waterfalls that bloomed instead of flowed. Adults lingered, smiling softly at the ingenuity, touched by the way something so simple could spark such delight. The cascade became a favorite corner of the garden, a place where people stopped not just to admire but to feel wonder. As the sun moved across the sky, the colors shifted. By morning, dew sparkled on the painted rims. By noon, the flowers glowed with fierce brightness. By evening, the cascade became a soft silhouette, its blossoms still glowing faintly against the fading light. The landscape cup cascade whispered gently to the world, "Beauty is not bound by grandeur, but by imagination." Even in the smallest cups, when arranged with vision, life can flow endlessly, like a river of blossoms carrying joy through the garden.